Hi, this is Chris Howard, host of Plugged In with Chris Howard, and I'm taking the Lions over the Chiefs in the Super Bowl. BetOnline has free odds and lines available online or on your mobile device. Visit BetOnline today.
Shake up your day with the new Starbucks Iced Hazelnut Oat Milk Shaken Espresso. Layers of smooth blonde espresso, rich hazelnut, and creamy oat milk, shaken to delicious perfection. Order yours with the Starbucks app.
Welcome to the Media Roundtable Industry Edition, where we dive deep into events and topics around the business of audio through the lens of the brands and buyers who support it, or as we like to call them, Chief Audio Officers. I'm your host, Kristen Duenas, Associate Media Director at Oxford Road, and today we are back to break down this week's top stories in the industry. To help me, please welcome Oxford Road Agents of Influence, Neal Lucey, EVP of Strategy and Product.
Hello.
Ricardo Martinez, Senior Director of Key Accounts.
Hi, somehow you got me back for a second episode. I'm excited to be here.
Welcome back. And Spencer Semonsen, Media Buyer.
They tried to keep me off the Zoom, but I'm back. I'm back again, everyone.
And we love to have you. Normally, we are joined by James Cridland, editor at the Podcast Business Journal, to discuss the latest industry news. Unfortunately, this week, James is unable to join us as he is traveling. We'll catch up with him again in a couple of weeks. Before we dive into industry news, though, it would be remiss of us to not mention that this past Saturday was International Podcast Day. I don't know how you guys celebrated, but I celebrated by vacuuming my entire house, AirPods in, and discovering a new podcast. So I discovered the vacation family trips with the Myers brothers. Have you guys heard of this one?
Yes.
Seth Meyer and brother, and interviewing all of their celebrity friends, which everybody loves their celebrity podcasts. So here's a new one for us. And there's like maybe 10 or so episodes so far. Good listen. Highly recommend. What did you guys get up to?
I was in a hockey rink, a cold hockey rink in Burbank, not listening to podcasts, but watching my son play hockey. I will check out the Seth Meyers podcast because that sounds like it will be a lot of fun.
Definitely.
I was at my friend's wedding as the maid of honor, but the next day when I was on my plane, I did start Scamanda, which is super fun. It's from Lionsgate. It's, I believe, a 10-part series. Highly recommend. It's really good.
Is this one of the new fiction podcasts?
No, it's true crime scammer kind of
Oh,
stuff, which is my wheelhouse right now.
I like it. I like it. Any new podcasts for you, Ricardo, this weekend?
Actually, what's old is new again, because I went back and saw some back catalog episodes of Business Wars, the old Ford versus Chevy episodes. So those were exciting. Exciting for me. It was a good time.
I think that's the best thing about podcasts, right? It's like, it's always going to be exciting for somebody. It's just finding that somebody. All right. Well, I'm glad everybody had a good international podcast weekend, except for Neal. He's going to have to learn how to multitask. Kicking off our main stories, though, let's talk about it. Spotify's AI voice translation pilot means your favorite podcasters might be heard in your native language.
Yes. This was recently covered by Pod News. Spotify is introducing voice translation for podcasts. It's a groundbreaking AI-powered feature that translates podcasts into various languages while preserving the podcaster's voice. This is a big change. As part of the pilot, Spotify worked closely with podcasters such as Dak Shepard, Bill Simmons, and Lex Fridman to generate AI-powered voice translations to Spanish, French, German, and many other key languages. And this innovation aims to enhance the global podcasting experience and foster a deeper connection between creators and their listeners. So we've talked about this quite a bit, kind of raising red flags about AI possibly replacing the host endorsement or the host read, and how we kind of have a 5-alarm bell up about that. But on the flip side, this is a really cool, innovative thing that's also going into the YouTube space. And I just find it really interesting that, you know, traditional dubbing is just so clanky and strange versus this. And I just really am excited to see what kind of markets we can unlock by simply translating media that already exists and opening a lot of scalability outside the US. Let's start with Ricardo. Do you have any thoughts on this new innovation?
Well, a couple. I went and I listened to a few episodes. I mean, I don't want to name names per se, but I did listen to Dax Shepard and Lex Friedman. And let's just say not everyone is as good in the AI translation as you would think. And really, as I was hearing them, I mean, some people are known for speaking fluent Spanish, like Dax Shepard. His wife, Kristen Bell, not so much. Lex Friedman claims he speaks it, questionable based on what I heard. And so I think what's really interesting about this is when the person actually speaks the language, the AI translation is incredible, and it really allows the listener to connect with the host. But when the person doesn't speak Spanish, it's you're hearing the AI accent, which is kind of weird to hear, right? And so so it's kind of I think it's kind of going to be like back in when the talkies came out, and some people did well when you could hear their voice, and other people did not. So we'll see what happens there.
So sorry, I have a question, Ricardo, because I'm not a native Spanish speaker. You are. So you're listening to those translations, and I know that so often you lose a lot of the colloquialisms when it comes to Spanish speaking. And so AI then was it very formal in its translation, or did it adjust a little bit?
No, it was a pretty good translation. Obviously, it's an exact translation, so it's not acculturation, which we often like to ask for when we translate materials. So no, the translation itself is great. Dax Shepard, his accent was perfect in Spanish. He actually you could hear his personality because his accent was so good. Kristen Bell's not as good. She's not a fluent Spanish speaker, and so with her, there was a lot of kind of broken up. It didn't flow as well. It was a little harder to listen to.
So I think this is the AI version of Kristen Bell?
This is the AI version. So it's actually their voice. So I'm assuming that they've gone to the studio and recorded phonetically, like a bunch of different sounds. But if you can't roll your R's, you can't really do a Spanish accent correctly. And that can be okay. I mean, Spanish audiences are used to hearing, translations from different actors. But this can be a little grating if it's not done right. So we'll see how it does as a whole once it expands.
I think one of the things that could be very beneficial for advertisers is that we know when we go into other markets, it helps to have the ad read in the language of the country that you're advertising in, even if it's like Australia, which is still English, but with an Australian accent, because so often these people in other countries feel that these ads aren't targeted to them. They ignore them because they feel that it doesn't apply. So even if it's AI translated, perhaps there would be like a higher return on investment just because now it's in their language. They know it's meant for them. And it's not just a US carryover.
Have any of you heard AI stew by any chance?
That sounds amazing.
Give me access immediately.
Where there is AI stew out there. I've heard it. And it wasn't stew. Like it was very perfect, kind of like the cadence wasn't right. And so he sped it up a little bit and it was actually pretty good. Like when you sped up the AI stew, it actually sounded like stew.
That's amazing. I think we all should play with this. And next time I host, it's going to be AI Kristen hosting. It'll be fantastic. Moving on. AM/FM radio and podcasts can recapture lost TV reach due to writers and actors strike, as 22% of the heavy linear TV audience say they're going to watch less TV this fall. Now, this was an article that came out a couple of weeks ago, so it's a little less timely because last week the writer strike ended. We are still very much on board with the SAG strike still, so there still is going to be some very severe delays. But Neal, why don't you tell us what the take is on this one?
I applaud Pierre Bouvard, who really drove this research with Signal Hill Insights. It got a lot of press coverage. The one thing that kind of stuck in my mind is how one particular question was asked, due to the strike, this fall's TV schedule will have more reruns, game shows, reality TV, in place of scripted shows. So please select how that will change how you watch TV. So I feel like when you word a question like that, you're
leading.
probably going to get the results maybe you want, which is that I'm not going to watch as much TV because TV is not going to be very good in the fall, but the behavior of what people actually do and what they say is oftentimes very different. So, I mean, I think that there's just that factor of like how the question was, how some of the questions were worded, as well as behavior not necessarily matching what people say they will do.
So it's like a court show moment of objection, leading the panelist.
Yes, I think there's a little leading the panelist here for sure. And then, I mean, even though the writer's strike has been resolved, certainly it's going to take a while for the scripted programming to come back, and there's still the SAG-AFTRA strike going on as well.
I mean, the writers were on strike since May, so it's definitely going to, I don't think we're going to see new content till probably January at the earliest, if we're lucky. But that's fair.
Yeah. I was just going to say, to that point, for me, anecdotally, I wouldn't replace the viewing that I did for TV with audio, but I might go to audio or Twitch streaming or video if the personalities that I saw on regular TV or OTT were now only there. So like Adam Conover, for instance, he's on the front lines of the WGA, very funny comedian, had 2 different streaming shows that aren't producing right now. You can only hear his coverage of the strike on Twitch or on his podcast Factually, and I'm following him there to hear updates or to hear what's going on with him or his background research. And I think that's really when it's replaced, is just when you're following someone around because you can't get your daily dose.
Makes a ton of sense.
One thing that I took from this article, one thing that I took from this article is actually something that I wish Neal could comment on. And that was actually the line, and maybe it's a little self-serving since I work in audio, but that a 20% shift of TV budget over to radio would have a tremendous increase on reach. I thought that was awesome. And I mean, we just see such efficient CPMs on radio that I think that's a message that we need to remind people of, because oftentimes radio gets kind of set aside as people have shifted more onto podcasts and other digital streaming channels.
Yeah, for sure. Without a question, if you add radio into the mix, if you just take, 10% of your budget out of video, for instance, you're going to gain reach, especially if you're adding radio specifically because of the mass reach and the efficiencies that radio provides. So there's no doubt about it. Some of the reach gains that I've seen in some of the studies seem overly optimistic. When we've done our own scenarios using Nielsen CompsPoint, which is a tool that we have at Oxford Road, we definitely see increases, and they're not increases that you would, shy away from, but they're not like a 50% increase from reach. It's like, you get a few percentage points of reach over a campaign that didn't have radio in the mix.
So definitely worth it then for advertisers to be looking into fall audio in place of scripted TV. But there's always unscripted TV, which brings us to our next segment, Taylor Swift. Spencer?
Okay, bear with me, because this has relevance to what we're talking about. So I shouldn't say fellow Swifties, I'm not a Swiftie, but from Business Insider, we have an article about how Taylor Swift is making Travis Kelce a whole lot of money this year, just by virtue of possibly dating him. Yes, dating him. His jerseys have gone up 400% on Fanatics network of sites, and he is the #1 seller on those sites. But also he has a podcast with his brother, Jason, and that is been #1 podcast on Apple charts for 4 days straight. I checked even 5 minutes ago and it's still there. So what is the point of bringing that up on this podcast? A piece of advice for buyers, just in general, read the news, all the news. it could have a vast change to your media planning for Q4 and Q1, or just in general. And for CAOs, leave budget open throughout the year to test tune-in opportunities. Even short play DR things like this, just getting in, getting out, could give you a high amount of volume just for Q4. And, you can't really set aside money to know who Taylor Swift's going to date in January 2023. So leave that open, leave money on the table, because you never know when you're going to get that last minute opportunity.
All right, so tell me if you've ever heard of any of these companies. Indeed, Shopify, NetSuite, Headspace, Quip, Theragun, Postmates. I'm not only the host of the Media Roundtable, but also CEO of a company called Oxford Road, and we are the world's leading independently owned and operated audio ad agency. And what that means is that we help great companies, many that you have probably heard of on some of the other podcasts that you listen to. We help them test and scale campaigns in audio channels, with podcast being one of those leading channels. Some of the work that we do includes media planning and buying, as well as analytics, attribution, and insights. And we also have a very special way that we deal with creative and copy generation. We have our own proprietary process called Audiolytics that allows us to score ads for their persuasiveness. If you're looking to be involved in audio and you want a partner that can help work with you to make sure that you achieve unprecedented ROI and massive scale, you should get in touch with us at Oxford Road. And by the way, the only reason that we're able to do the work of the Media Roundtable is because we have a great team at Oxford Road that supports us and makes it possible. So, what we're doing is not just a podcast, but we're really trying to help brands live out their values and balance that with their business objectives, which is an increasingly hard thing to do in this world of misinformation and malice that's infecting so much of our media. But at Oxford Road, we don't want to just broker this stuff. We want to impact the industry for good. We want to raise the bar on what gets created. And Oxford Road is helping make that possible through the Media Roundtable. So if you're somebody that's interested in working with an ad agency or a partner on this type of work for your advertising campaigns, go to oxfordroad.com. It's easy to spell. And get in touch with us, or at least just sign up for our free newsletter, The Influencer. That's oxfordroad.com.
That's amazing. I watched a little bit of Sunday Night Football last night, and the Kansas City was playing the Jets, my poor Jets. And they definitely, Taylor Swift got a lot of airtime in that broadcast, as she did the week prior. So I think anything that she touches or is in contact with is going to see massive growth, right?
I don't think that the owner of the Chiefs is too sad right now, because ticket sales are going through the roof in case she might actually show up. Like not even confirmed that she's there, but she might be there, and you might be able to glimpse a tiny little picture of her in person, which is bonkers to me.
But Spencer, I think your point, I think it's really well taken for media buyers and marketers alike too. Make sure that you're following what's happening in the broader culture, because it could have an impact, and it could have present opportunities to you as advertisers, and having some money kind of stashed away to take advantage of those opportunities is always a good thing.
Yeah, we've certainly seen some political influencers or political interviews that have kind of popped up last minute, where it's like who first to say yes gets the opportunity, and those opportunities have been really successful for the clients that have taken part of them, and they provided incredible reach when some of these last minute opportunities pop up. So that extra budget is definitely welcome and encouraged, I think, on the account side. What I really take away from this article is that I really hope they have a bad breakup. I mean, I wish her the best, but like I do love my Taylor Swift, and bad breakups are awesome for music. I mean, just think about Shakira and PK, and like every time she sings a song about her ex-husband, or ex-partner, I guess, Like, it's incredible for fans. So keep it toxic, Taylor, please.
So you're hoping for like compelling music to come out of this.
I mean, I wish her the best, but I don't want I don't want Adele Take Two where like she finds happiness and now her music sucks.
Yeah, I mean, if you're content and you're an artist, that's, not a recipe for success, is it?
Well, I think
Wish her the best.
the podcasters out there will be talking about this for quite some time. So whether they work it out or don't, I think she's going to be providing us some definite news. Going on, Hispanics remain big audio users. Nielsen says language is less a factor than in the past. Neal, what is this?
So we talked a little bit a couple of podcasts ago about the Hispanic podcast report. And in that report, they talked about the growth in listenership among the Hispanic audience. This is another report from Nielsen. It's really a broader report looking at overall media usage by the Hispanic segment. But in that report, there's information about audio usage, AM, FM listening, podcast listening. So the things that stood out to me were, according to Nielsen, 94% of Hispanic adults, and this is even among 18 to 49. So we don't necessarily see this among the 18 to 49 segment. And the general population are listening to AM, FM radio on a monthly basis. So that's almost 29 million listeners. That's a huge audience. And Hispanics are also 13% more likely than the general population to listen to podcasts. So the Hispanic segment is newer to podcasts, but they are listening, and they're listening a lot. So they have adopted to the medium quite quickly. And then other factor, when you're thinking about AM, FM radio, it tends to be Spanish language, first and foremost. But when you're going into podcasts, there's a lot more nuance to it. So language is not the sole factor that we need to consider. There's more factors. It's the relevance of the content, how it resonates with the cultural context, and making sure that you're connecting with the audience in an authentic way. I think my hot take is the Hispanic segment from the latest census is almost 20% of the US population. That is a huge percentage of the US population. So if you're not advertising to this segment, either via the Spanish language media, which tends to be more the traditional media channels, or via relevant content in an appropriate way, you're really missing out on a big marketing opportunity.
Yeah, Neal, this is a pretty timely article because we're also in the middle of Hispanic Heritage Month, which, listeners might be surprised runs from the 15th of September to the 15th of October. So it's kind of a weird month long between 2 months period. But happy Hispanic Heritage Month, everyone. But I think what's really, and this is an area of special interest to me. I mean, I've done a lot of Hispanic marketing in the past and in previous careers. We still do a little bit here. But the U.S. Latino economic output grew to $3.2 trillion, according to a report by the Latino Donor Collaborative and Wells Fargo. So that is actually a huge amount. That economic output, that GDP, would make the U.S. Latino population the fifth largest economy in the world, like ahead of the UK, ahead of India, ahead of France. So it's just a huge opportunity for marketers to tap into. It's an area that every study shows that the Hispanic audience in particular feels that they are underrepresented. I mean, I love myself some Hallmark movies, and especially in the romance category, 48% of Hispanics say that they do not see themselves represented in romance. They don't see themselves represented in sports. So there's a lot of programming opportunity to tap into, both on the content side for people producing podcasts, and then in terms of the audience itself, right? There's a lot of growth potential here, and it's an audience that has shifted considerably from being predominantly immigrant to first, second, third generation Hispanics. And with that change, there's been a significant shift in terms of language use, as Neal alluded to, with I believe it's 57% of the Hispanic population that is not foreign-born, are primarily English speakers and speak Spanish as well. So 57% of Hispanics speak Spanish, of U.S.-born Hispanics speak Spanish, whereas like something like 97% of foreign-born Hispanics speak Spanish. So you don't need to translate a website. You don't need to translate your content necessarily in Spanish in order to tap into this audience. So it's important that we kind of tell marketers that, so they can, in their plans, include a portion of that audience, because it is now the largest ethnic cohort in the country. So really important for us to be aware of where the audience is, and it's also a very young audience. So it's kind of the kind of demo that you want to tap into.
Yeah, for sure. I think the average age is about 10 years younger than the US population average. So if you're wanting to reach a younger audience, the Hispanic segment is going to be a big portion of that segment. I know I did an analysis not too long ago, just looking at the size of the US Hispanic market compared to other markets outside the US. So for a client that has international expansion ambitions, and the US Hispanic market was actually a bigger opportunity, as Ricardo, you were mentioning, than the UK or Spain or a number of these countries. So it's like, why not tap into that more?
Yeah, for sure. I think there's a lot of opportunity there. And I'm going to jump the gun here a little bit on Kristen with some quick honorable mentions, if I might, Kristen.
Please, by all means.
One of the other articles that we saw that was really interesting this week is kind of related, but I do want to point out that it's different, right? Because what we were talking about just now is the U.S. Hispanic population. So those are Hispanics living in the U.S. But when we talk about Latin Americans, people from, Central and South America, that's a completely different audience. And one of the articles that came out is about the Mexican listener in particular, and about the tremendous growth of the Mexican podcast listener. Spencer, do you want to kind of talk about that?
Yes, I think it's kind of like a similar trope that we talked about with, while there's differences between second and first generation Hispanics within the US, there's also a big difference between people living in Mexico, people living in Chile, people living in Brazil. And it's really important that you speak to each of the cultural differences in these places as well as the US when you create the content. Just because it's all Spanish language doesn't mean that it's going to reach the same ears and resonate with the same message. Mexico is obviously one of our besties right there on the border. So I'm not too surprised that it's high in popularity, as the US is one of the largest producers of podcasts in the world. It's one of the reasons why we use it as a benchmark against other countries when we're looking at ways to work with those countries. But really, the conversation should be more about finding producers and podcasters in Mexico, speaking, the right message, and pairing with them as advertisers versus continually just taking recycled content and putting it in front of a Spanish language audience.
For sure. And I think I didn't share some of the numbers up top, but Mexico is ranked as the third largest producer of content globally, with over 40 million listeners. That only trails Brazil and Sweden. Brazil's had a lead for a long time in podcast content. It was an early adopter. And overall, the industry is projected to generate 43 million in advertising revenue by the end of the year. That's a threefold increase since 2019. And Spotify reported 118% increase in Mexican podcast consumption in 2023. So it's just an audience that is ready for this content. It's kind of fully embraced podcasting across the different content genres: comedy, news, true crime, sports, health podcasts. Those are particularly popular. In terms of how people are consuming podcasts in Mexico, YouTube does lead in podcast consumption with 42% of the audience. But Spotify and Amazon Music are pretty close behind. Spotify is 24%, and Amazon about 10%. But really, this is, I think we need to start thinking about Mexico, given how closely aligned it is with the US is no longer like a developing country. It really is a middle income country now. And so there's tremendous opportunity as you're exploring international markets to tap into the Mexican podcast listener in Mexico.
And how many podcasts from Mexico do you listen to, and how many are they recaps of telenovelas, Ricardo?
Well, that stays between me and my never mind. No, I actually don't watch a lot of telenovelas because right now the kind of telenovelas that I'm really into are actually Turkish soap operas. The Turkish soap operas have become really popular in Mexico and in actually the US Hispanic community. And so they're all just like dubbed, not AI, it's actual dubbers translating these Turkish soap operas, and they're really fun, really popular.
That's amazing.
That is amazing.
I do love that so much. Neal,
Shall we move on?
Yeah, I think Neal's got some more international news for us, though.
Yeah, just a quick hit here. So Edison Research has launched their inaugural UK top 25 podcast chart. So the interesting thing about this, one, Joe Rogan cannot be defeated. He's number one in the UK, just as he is here. But the majority of the content, all but 4 of the top 25 podcasts, were British titles, a lot of BBC. So probably not expecting a lot of advertising opportunity in those BBC podcasts, unfortunately. And I think what's important, we have a lot of tools in the US, and as we're going into international markets, a lot of these tools do not exist to the degree that we have. So this is great to see US tools and measurement expanding into international markets, giving marketers more information and confidence in the choices they're making as they go into new markets and use podcasts as part of their marketing mix.
I mean, Neal, I'm really excited about this Edison Research publication because, I mean, a few years ago when Oxford first started kind of diving into the international marketplace for podcast listening and podcast sales, it was really hard to find content that would take advertising for B2B and for other audiences. I think we had to invest in first party research that scoured web patterns and traffic patterns in order to like figure out what were the most popular shows out there. So I'm really excited that they've been, someone's done the work for us this time, and we can see the top 25. I do find this list a little suspect because, when I was looking at it, I think I saw 6 of the 25 were BBC titles. BBC doesn't take any international, or it doesn't take any advertising because it is publicly supported. But from what I remember of the UK marketplace, it was a lot of like local productions and local independent studios. So the fact that Joe Rogan's so highly ranked, I'm sure I know it was very popular even when we first started doing this research on our own. But I'm surprised to see it as number 1.
I think that's just an economy of scale, right? Joe Rogan is just the largest podcast anyway. So statistically, it makes sense that it would still be large in the UK. When we go through some of our Podscribe reporting, little plug for Podscribe there, what I can see as far as impressions delivered against geo, UK is consistently second place behind the US as far as impressions served. So we know that people in the UK are listening. This doesn't surprise me then that Joe Rogan would have the number 1 spot, just because I know that I'm already getting second place UK impressions on much smaller shows. So if you blow it up, no big surprise.
Not at all.
Yeah. Okay. Spencer, podcasting for influence.
Yes, Lower Street and Content FX discovered that 55% of business owners and founders are listening to podcasts daily, and that podcasts have a strong impact on listeners' brand awareness and favorability. This isn't anything that we didn't already know. We've touched on this quite a bit, especially in the B2B space. It's one of the reasons why we've been able to scale multiple clients to the heights that we have been, because there is so much room to grow. What's interesting to me is that if this is true, and there's so many decision makers already listening in the space, a great way that a brand who's already looking for more content to get in the audio space is to go into branded content, branded segments, interviews, or limited series. I have many podcast producers who are looking, chomping at the bit to work with us on a larger scale, especially as a DR shop. That's not something we do a bit. But for select clients, it's actually a great way to increase brand awareness and, plug in some budget in Q4 or early Q1.
Yeah, I agree. I agree
Awesome.
with that I didn't see a ton new in this research.
Mhm.
I mean, it confirmed what we already know for our B2B advertisers, that podcasts work for B2B advertising. I did find the branded podcasts as something, that to consider, especially for those clients that can produce content, that can produce compelling content, that can provide a valuable service to B2B companies. So that's not everybody, because some things are so niche, but for those companies that kind of are more expansive, there can be a place for a branded podcast.
And something that I would take into consideration for anybody who's listening was like, oh, branded podcast sounds really great for my business. Yes, it is, but give yourself plenty of lead time. Branded content isn't turnkey. It's not something that you can just, I'm going to be on the show and this is what it's going to be tomorrow. It's something that is really well thought out by our networks and our partners. And we want to make sure that the content is aligned, that everybody has really thought it through, that the networks have the best opportunity to put their best foot forward. So give yourself a decent amount of lead time before jumping into branded podcasts. My 2 cents.
All right. I think I have the next two.
You do.
I think that this will close it. And part of the first one was, we talked about podcast radio. It was an announcement at Podcast Movement that podcast radio is now coming to our terrestrial stations, and it has launched. So if you're in Detroit, Tampa, Charlotte, Fort Myers, Naples, you can tune in to podcast radio. I don't know if you're going to get 20 minutes of advertising or not. Maybe you will, but it's here. And I think one of the things that I found interesting, because we live in Los Angeles, and so a lot of us have listened to K-Rock. Bean, formerly of the Kevin and Bean morning show that ran for decades on K-Rock in Los Angeles, is one of the pod jocks for the podcast radio. So go figure.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to hearing that.
So I'm in the Charlotte DMA. So I may have to check this out and start listening to terrestrial radio instead of just all the podcasts I listen to. I'm curious to see.
Report back on this.
I'm going to report back, let you know what it sounds like.
Should I plug my one local Wisconsin, which is WORT, WORT, which is the best alternative station? Let's go.
Awesome. Thank you for that. We'll look out for it.
All right. Last but not least, Spotify has partnered with Roku. So Spotify and Roku announced a partnership to bring video ads to the Spotify app. We talked about this as well. It's certainly clear that Spotify would like to grab a share of CTV's ad spend, and why wouldn't they? Because it dwarfs audio spend. The thing and to think about here is, and I saw this in Insider Intelligence because they put it really well. This will reach people as they use their TV as their living room speaker. So if you're delivering video content and you're using your TV as a living room speaker, are you actually delivering video content, or are you just delivering audio content that has a companion video? So if you're a marketer and you want to take advantage of that, I would still think about that, and think about that you probably have to approach it as an audio first ad versus video first and audio second.
So here's what's really cool about this is that Spotify is already available on Roku. It's also available on your Amazon, Fire TVs or whatever it is you're using for your streaming TV. So you can easily switch between your phone, your computer to your TV for Spotify using these systems. Ease of use is fantastic. If you were already getting just audio, now you get a music video to go along with it. The possibilities here are endless. So it's not just going to be pixel tracked, but now you can maybe have a QR code, special things that Roku is pretty good at doing, as far as like different integrations. I think this could be really, really fun to test, and I can't wait to get my hands on it.
Any thoughts, Ricardo and Spencer, on this one? Or are we going to leave it with Kristen has the last word?
Well,
I always have last
I really
word.
should leave it with Kristen has the last word, because even though I try to practice listening more than speaking, when you're on a podcast, you have to talk. And, if anybody wants to come over to my house for dinner sometime, you'll be listening to the Girl from Ipanema playlist on Spotify played through my Roku player. That's what I do. So I do use my TV as a speaker during dinner time in particular. So no one's really looking at the video content there, because we're all, we consider it a background thing, but it'll be interesting to see how this plays out. And so with that oversharing, I'll turn it over to Spencer to see if she has any comments.
I'm always excited to see what Spotify is doing with video assets for their advertising campaigns. They're steering the trends for the way we're thinking more about video from an audio standpoint. And I am also very excited to test it out, just to see what they're doing that others in the industry aren't.
I think it'll be a lot of fun to see what they do, where it goes. And at the end of the day, how much is it going to cost? But we'll get there when we get there. And that's it. Thank you all for joining the Media Roundtable. If you haven't already checked it out, we do have a second episode coming out on Wednesday ad infinitum, hosted by our own Stu Redwine. Do take the time to listen to it. It'll be worth it. This podcast is brought to you by Oxford Road, where we want you to succeed in audio and to use influence for good. As members of the marketing community, we have the power to advance voices that don't just entertain, but edify, to build bridges across differences and preserve fair-minded discussion around the most important topics of our age. If you're a marketer looking to align your brand values with extraordinary business outcomes, reach out to our agency, Oxford Road, by visiting oxfordroad.com and subscribing to our weekly newsletter, The Influencer. We'd love to hear from you. If you have any feedback or suggestions, please don't hesitate to reach out to us at info@mediaroundtable.com. Thank you to our guests and to Bianca, Kyle, Haley, and the team at Podcast One. As always, influence responsibly.
Hi, this is Chris Howard, host of Plugged In with Chris Howard, and I'm taking the lines over the Chiefs in the Super Bowl. BetOnline has free odds and lines available online or on your mobile device. Visit BetOnline today.